The evening air hung heavy with a creeping chill, the kind that seeped into bones and whispered secrets in the rustling of dying leaves. Thomas Grady stood at the boundary where the village gave way to the endless sea of cornfields, those tall stalks that had sustained Harrow's End for generations. Tonight, however, the fields seemed different, alive, with a sound that was not quite wind, not quite the rustling of dry leaves. A whisper, faint and fragile, tugged at the edges of Thomas's consciousness. He squinted into the dying light, the sky a bruised purple above the waving gold. The whispers were there, soft as a breath, threading through the stalks like a secret only the fields dared to tell. Thomas's heart thudded low and heavy in his chest. After months of silence, the voices had returned. The village had tried to move on. After the devastating sacrifice that had scarred their community, the fields had fallen silent, the oppressive dread lifting like fog at dawn. But the silence had felt fragile, a thin veneer over something far older and darker. Thomas's jaw clenched as he listened. The whispers were not just a memory, they were a warning. Back in the village hall, the air was thick with unease. Maggie Ellis sat across from Thomas, her auburn hair catching the flicker of candlelight as she flipped through the tattered pages of the ancestral journal. Sheriff Daniel Crow leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his usual stern expression softened by worry. Eli Grady sat tense at the far end of the table, his restless eyes darting between the adults who carried the weight of their shared past. The whispers, Maggie said quietly, they're back. Not loud, but they're there. The land is stirring again. Sheriff Crow shook his head. You expect me to believe the crops are talking? After everything, Thomas, maybe it's just the wind playing tricks. Thomas held the sheriff's gaze steadily. I wish that were true. But after what we've seen, I can't ignore it. Eli spoke up, his voice shaking slightly. I told you, they never left. They're waiting, hungry. We just made it quiet for a while. The room fell silent, the weight of Eli's words sinking in. The harvest spirit's hunger was not sated. It was patient, eternal. Later, Maggie wandered the quiet streets, the village bathed in moonlight and the soft glow of scattered lanterns. Her footsteps were hushed against the earth, but the night was alive with the faintest murmur from the fields beyond. She paused, breath catching in her throat as the whispers swirled around her like smoke. Memories of the past, of terror and sacrifice, rose unbidden. She clenched her fists, resolve hardening. They had survived once. They could survive again. Meanwhile, Thomas knelt in a freshly harvested patch of earth, fingers sifting through the loose soil. The wind stirred, carrying that haunting sound once more, a sibilant lullaby of something ancient and hungry. He closed his eyes, the burden of legacy pressing down, but beneath it, a fragile spark of hope. The curse was not ended, but the village would not fall without a fight. As night deepened, the whispers wove through the fields, a chilling promise that the harvest spirit endured. And Thomas, standing watch beneath the stars, vowed to confront whatever darkness lay ahead. The shadows may return, but so too would the courage to stand against them. The fragile silence was broken once more, and with it, the fate of Harrow's End hung trembling on the edge of a blade. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the worn wooden floor of Thomas Grady's study, its fading light filtering through curtains heavy with dust and the scent of old paper. His fingers trembled slightly as they turned another fragile page of the ancient journal. Maggie had found weeks before a journal that seemed to hold the key to understanding the terrible legacy that now suffocated Harrow's End. The room was silent except for the faint scratch of his pen marking notes on a fresh sheet of yellowed parchment and the creak of the settling farmhouse. Outside, the cornfields whispered softly in the evening breeze. Their voices a constant, haunting reminder of the pact that had bound the village for centuries. Thomas had spent countless nights walking those fields, listening intently, trying to decipher the restless murmurs that had once seemed like mere superstition but now bore the weight of deadly truth. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing as he reflected on the burden his ancestors had passed down, a covenant sworn in desperation and sealed with blood. The ancestral pact, a secret buried beneath generations of silence, demanded a price that no farming community could ever truly afford. Yet the land had thrived, its bounty unnatural in its abundance, sustained by sacrifices that twisted the very soul of Harrow's End. Maggie's voice broke the heavy quiet, soft but urgent. "Thomas, look here." She pointed to a passage written in spidery script, dense with cryptic symbols and archaic language. "This part, it speaks of the cycle. The spirit does not merely demand sacrifice, it feeds on the fear and obedience of the villagers. It's bound to their belief as much as to the blood." Thomas furrowed his brow, tracing the words with a finger. "So, it's not just about the sacrifice itself. It's about the legacy, the fear we carry, the stories we tell ourselves, the silence we keep." Maggie nodded. "We have to break that. We have to change the story, or this will never end." Their resolve was tempered by the cold understanding that the darkness was ancient, patient, and cunning. It had survived centuries of whispered warnings and forgotten curses. Yet in this knowledge lay a fragile hope. By uncovering and confronting the truth, they might sever the chains of the past. That evening, Old Man Harrow arrived, his presence as weathered and enduring as the land itself. His eyes, sharp beneath the brim of his hat, held a solemnity that spoke of countless seasons spent guarding the village's secrets. "The pact was made in desperation," he rasped, voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "Our forebears chose survival over innocence, and the land accepted their bargain. But the cost is never truly paid." Thomas listened, the weight of the elder's words pressing down like the oppressive summer heat. "Is there any way to undo it? To end this without more bloodshed?" Old Man Harrow's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the last light clung to the edges of the restless cornfields. "There are ways," he admitted quietly, "but each path demands sacrifice in its own way. The choice is never simple, and the darkness does not easily relinquish its hold." As night deepened, Thomas stood alone at the edge of the cornfield, the tall stalks swaying silently beneath a starlit sky. The whispers had ceased for the moment, leaving an eerie stillness that settled over the earth like a shroud. Clutching his journal close, Thomas felt the dual weight of dread and duty. The legacy of shadows would follow him and those who came after, an unending vigilance to guard against the encroaching darkness. Yet, in the silence, there flickered a fragile spark of hope. By naming the curse, by recording its truths, Thomas had taken the first step toward breaking the cycle. The story of Harrow's End would no longer be one of quiet fear, but a warning etched into the pages of history. But as the wind stirred the corn once more, faint whispers returned, soft, persistent, and hungry, reminding Thomas that some shadows never fully disappear. The harvest of shadows was not yet over. With a steady breath, Thomas turned from the field and walked back toward the village. The path ahead, uncertain, but the burden he bore now shared in ink and memory. He would keep watch. He would tell the story. And if the darkness stirred again, Harrow's End would be ready. The morning sun cast a pale light over Harrow's End, illuminating a village slowly stirring from its long nightmare. The streets, once eerily silent, now echoed with the familiar sounds of hammers striking nails, the creak of wagons laden with supplies, and the murmur of voices, tentative yet determined. Scattered piles of debris lay where homes had been scarred by the restless harvest spirit's wrath. But the people moved with purpose, their hands steady despite trembling hearts. Thomas Grady stood at the edge of the village square, his gaze sweeping over the scene. Weathered faces, some worn with grief, others marked by relief, passed by as they carried timber or fetched water. His lean frame tensed with a mixture of pride and sorrow. The cost had been heavy, but the community's will to endure burned brighter than the flickering lanterns that still dotted the streets in the twilight hours. Beside him, Maggie Ellis adjusted the brim of her worn hat, her auburn hair catching the sunlight. "It's strange," she said quietly, "how the village feels both the same and different. Like the land remembers what happened, and so do we." Thomas nodded, his sharp blue eyes narrowing. "We can't forget. We owe it to those we lost. But we also have to keep living." The harvest festival was tentatively planned for the coming week, sir. Fragile symbol of defiance against the darkness that had shadowed their lives. This time, the festival would be quieter, marked by remembrance rather than celebration. The villagers had agreed to honor the past sacrifices with simple rituals, flowers, and quiet prayers, rather than the old offerings that had once fed the land's cursed hunger. In the church, a meeting gathered the village's remaining leaders. Sheriff Daniel Crow, his stocky frame filling the pulpit, spoke with a voice roughened by years of command and recent strain. "We've seen what fear can do," he said, "how it can divide us. But it's time to bind ourselves together again. We must watch the fields, watch each other, and never let the shadows take hold like before." Old Man Harrow, stooped and cryptic as ever, added in his gravelly tone, "The pact is not easily broken. The land remembers, but so do we. Let our memories be our shield." The villagers listened quietly, the room thick with unspoken fears and a cautious hope. Among them, Sarah Pike wiped tears from her cheeks, her grief still raw but tempered by the community's solidarity. Outside, Eli Grady lingered near a cluster of rebuilding homes. His youthful face showed the weight of superstition, but also a growing understanding. He caught Thomas's eye and nodded, a silent truce between skepticism and belief. As dusk fell, lanterns were hung along the main street, casting a warm glow that pushed back the encroaching shadows. At the village square, a simple altar was erected, adorned with wildflowers, corn husks, and candles flickering in the gentle breeze. The scent of fresh earth mingled with the faint smoke of wood fires, creating an atmosphere both solemn and sacred. Thomas stood beside Maggie, their hands almost touching as they surveyed the scene. "The fields are quiet tonight," he murmured, "but I don't think the darkness is gone." Maggie's smile was faint but steady. "Maybe not, but we're stronger now. We remember who we aren't, what we've survived." The festival would come, bringing with it memories both bitter and sweet. Harrow's End was reborn in the shadow of its past, its people bound by loss and hope alike. The whispers in the cornfields were silent for now, but the vigil would never end. Thomas knew this, and as he looked into the night sky, he steeled himself for whatever shadows the future might hold. For in the heart of the village, beneath the quiet celebration, the harvest of shadows continued, an enduring legacy of sacrifice, resilience, and the fragile promise of dawn. The late afternoon sun cast a soft, golden haze over the fields of Harrow's End, bathing the corn in an almost sacred light. Thomas Grady and Maggie Ellis moved quietly through the tallest stalks, their footsteps muffled by the thick earth beneath. They knelt side by side in the oldest cornfield, the place where the land's dark heart beat strongest. With a worn piece of wood, Thomas carefully traced ancient symbols into the soil symbols he had painstakingly copied from the faded pages of the ancestral journal Maggie had uncovered. The ritual was simple in appearance, but heavy with meaning. A delicate balance between respect and defiance. The corn rustled softly around them, whispering secrets carried on the breeze. Thomas's sharp blue eyes scanned the horizon, ever watchful despite the ritual's calm. "We honor the land," Maggie whispered, her auburn hair catching the last light of day, "but we don't feed the darkness." Thomas nodded, the weight of his family's legacy pressing down on him. For years, he had dismissed the old stories as superstition. Now, as he carved the symbols into the earth, he understood the fragile pact they were attempting to renew, a covenant to protect, not to sacrifice. Later, inside Maggie's modest farmhouse, the scent of herbal tea mingled with the flicker of candlelight. They sat at a worn wooden table, poring over the ancestral journal. The pages were brittle, ink faded, but the words carried the power to guide or doom them. Shadows danced across the walls as their voices dropped to hushed tones, each sentence weighed with solemnity. "There's a way to honor the land without blood," Maggie said, tracing a passage with her finger. "But it requires vigilance. Rituals, offerings, respect. We have to be consistent, or the spirit will demand more." Thomas clenched his jaw, the memory of vanished neighbors and whispered screams still fresh. "We'll do whatever it takes." As dusk settled over the village, the two moved to the outskirts, carrying small bundles of herbs, woven wheat stalks, and tokens of the earth's bounty. They placed each offering carefully near the cornfield's edge, their movements deliberate and reverent. Around them, the whispering cornfields seemed to quiet, as if listening intently. A cool breeze wound through the stalks, carrying a faint but unmistakable undertone of menace, a reminder that the harvest spirit was never far. Night crept over Harrow's End, cloaking the village in darkness. The usual sounds of nocturnal life were subdued, replaced by an eerie silence that held the breath of anticipation. Inside his farmhouse, Thomas stood by the window, eyes scanning the black horizon where cornfields swayed under a moonless sky. His fists clenched tightly, knuckles white. The burden of his ancestors weighed heavily on his shoulders, but beneath the dread burned a fragile ember of hope. Hope that, through knowledge, respect, and vigilance, they might finally break free from the cycle of sacrifice. "We're the guardians now," he murmured to himself, voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his heart. "The land's watchers." Maggie joined him at the window, her presence a quiet comfort. "And we won't let the darkness win." Outside, the corn whispered again, soft and low, neither threatening nor welcoming, but a reminder that the shadow of the harvest still lingered. The pact was not broken. Not yet. But in this moment, the village had taken its first true step toward reclaiming its future. The night stretched on, thick with tension and possibility. Somewhere deep in the fields, the harvest spirit stirred, sensing the shift. It was a game of shadows now, a delicate dance between man and nature, fear and hope, legacy and redemption. And as long as Thomas and Maggie stood watch, the people of Harrow's End might just survive the harvest of shadows. Yet the question remained, could rituals born from ancient knowledge truly safeguard the village without repeating the horrors of the past? Or was this fragile peace merely the calm before a storm yet to come? The wind whispered once more, carrying the answer away into the darkness. The first light of dawn filtered through the heavy mist that clung to the cornfields, casting a pale glow over the stalks that swayed gently in the morning breeze. Thomas Grady stood at the edge of the field, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun was just beginning to rise. The silence around him was profound, broken only by the soft rustle of the leaves and the distant call of a lone bird. Yet beneath that quiet lay the weight of so much lost, the vanished villagers. The blood soaked into the soil, the heavy price that had been paid for the fleeting bounty of the harvest. Thomas's shoulders sagged slightly, burdened not just by the physical toil of years on the farm, but by the emotional weight of the sacrifices that had shaped his home. He closed his eyes briefly, breathing in the cool morning air that smelled faintly of earth and dew. Memories of the past weeks surged forward, the whispers that had first seemed like the wind, the escalating terror as neighbors disappeared one by one, the fiery debates at the village meetings, and the harrowing nights spent wrestling with the dark truth of the ancestral pact. How had it come to this? How had the land's gifts become so twisted, demanding blood in exchange for sustenance? These questions haunted him relentlessly. Turning away from the field, Thomas made his way back toward the heart of the village. The streets were eerily quiet, the usual morning bustle replaced by a somber stillness that settled over Harrow's End like a shroud. He passed by shuttered windows and empty doorways, reminders of the families torn apart by fear and loss. At the small farmhouse where Maggie Ellis lived, he paused before knocking firmly on the door. Within moments, Maggie opened the door, her auburn hair tousled from restless sleep, her kind eyes shadowed but resolute. She ushered him inside without a word, leading him to the worn wooden table where the ancestral journal lay open, its fragile pages illuminated by the flickering glow of a single candle. Together, they leaned over the faded script, searching for any glimmer of hope amidst the cryptic warnings and dark rituals chronicled by their forebears. "There has to be a way to lessen the curse," Maggie murmured, tracing a finger along a passage that spoke of alternative offerings, of appeasement without destruction. "But it's so vague. We need more than half-truths and faded ink." Thomas nodded, rubbing his tired eyes. "Every time we think we understand, it slips further away. But we can't give up. Not now. Not after everything." The silence between them was thick with shared exhaustion and unspoken fears. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it faint whispers that seemed to echo through the walls, a constant reminder that the harvest spirit was never far away. Later that day, Thomas found himself outside the village hall where Eli waited, pacing nervously. The younger brother's eyes were troubled, reflecting a mixture of fear and frustration that had grown between them in recent weeks. Their beliefs about the curse and its origins were worlds apart. Thomas, the rational skeptic turned reluctant believer. Eli, the superstitious soul clinging to old legends with desperate hope. "Thomas, you can't keep shutting it all down," Eli pleaded, voice low but urgent. "The land, the spirited's angry. We have to listen." "I'm listening, Eli," Thomas replied evenly. "But we have to find a way through this without losing ourselves or each other. Sacrifice after sacrifice, it's tearing the village apart." Their words hung heavy between them, a fragile bridge over a widening gulf. The village depended on their unity, yet the strain of mistrust and grief threatened to unravel the bonds that had held Harrow's End together for generations. As night fell, Sheriff Daniel Crow took his usual patrol through the empty streets, his boots echoing against the cracked pavement. The weight of his responsibilities pressed down like the thick night air. Law and order seemed powerless against the unseen force that stalked the cornfields, whispering threats that no badge or weapon could silence. He paused at the edge of the village, staring into the darkened rows of corn where shadows shifted and danced. The harvest spirit was a menace beyond his understanding, a primal force that defied explanation or control. "We've done all we can," he muttered to himself, tightening his grip on the brim of his hat. Now it's up to Thomas and the others to find a way out of this darkness. Back in the farmhouse, Thomas sat alone long after Maggie had retired for the night. The journal lay closed on the table, its secrets seemingly out of reach. He thought of the faces lost, the sacrifices made, and the future that now seemed uncertain. Could there ever be redemption? Or was the price of survival a debt that Harrow's End would pay forever? Outside, a sudden breeze stirred the cornfields, and for a moment, the faintest whisper brushed against the window, a chilling reminder that the shadows were never truly gone, only waiting. Thomas's jaw clenched. He would not let the darkness win, not yet. Not while there was still breath in his body to fight for the village he loved, no matter the cost. And so, beneath the cold gaze of the moon, Harrow's End held its breath. Balanced between hope and despair, haunted by the past but determined to face whatever came next. The price of survival had never been Huroned. Thomas knew the hardest choices were still to come. The evening air hung heavy with a damp chill as the sun dipped low behind the distant hills, casting long shadows across the golden sea of corn that stretched beyond the village of Harrow's End. Thomas Grady stood at the edge of the fields, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his worn jacket, eyes narrowing into the gathering dusk. The stalks rustled softly, whispering secrets only the land could understand, or perhaps only those cursed to listen. Beside him, Maggie Ellis shifted uneasily, her auburn hair catching the last glimmers of light. "Do you hear it?" she asked quietly, her voice barely breaking the hush that settled over the fields. Thomas nodded slowly, his sharp blue eyes scanning the waving stalks. "It's always there," he said, just beneath the sound of the wind, like voices trying to speak through the rustling. Maggie swallowed, her gaze fixed on the shadows that flickered between the cornstalks. "It's been getting worse, hasn't it? The whispers, the sightings. I thought maybe with the last sacrifice, we'd finally be free." Thomas shook his head, a grim line tightening his weathered face. "The darkness doesn't rest, Maggie. The fields remember." Across the village, Sheriff Daniel Crow paced the cracked floor of the town hall, his sheriff's hat set aside as he surveyed a hastily drawn map pinned to the wall. His stocky frame was rigid, the gruff exterior masking the tightening knot of worry in his chest. The patrols he had ordered were still in place, but the fear threading through the villages was palpable, and he knew that order was fragile at best. A sharp rap at the door heralded the arrival of Sarah Pike, the local farmer whose family had suffered terribly these past weeks. Her face was pale, eyes sunken and wide with terror. "Sheriff," she whispered, voice trembling, "I saw it again. In the corn, a shadow. Watching." Crow's jaw clenched. "Where?" "Near the eastern edge, by the old miller's plot." "It didn't move like any man, Sheriff. It shifted, just stood there, watching me. I swear, it was the harvest spirit." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking like a stone. Crow rubbed his face, his pragmatic mind struggling to rationalize the impossible. "Well, send a patrol out immediately. Stay inside and lock your doors." But the dread had already seeped into every corner of Harrow's End. That night, Thomas found himself restless. The moon hung low and bright, casting a spectral glow over the fields. He wrapped his coat tighter around his lean frame and stepped outside, drawn once again to the whispering corn. The stalks swayed gently, but beneath their movement, The murmurs had grown into a low chant, almost pleading. He walked slowly into the heart of the field, senses alert to every sound, the crunch of dry leaves beneath his boots, the cool night air thick with the scent of earth and decay. Shadows danced at the edges of his vision, shapes hinting at forms both human and otherworldly. The harvest spirit, ever elusive, seemed to watch with unseen eyes. Thomas stopped near a cluster of ancient cornstalks, the ground beneath them stained dark, the faint scent of iron rising from the soil. His breath came in shallow bursts as the whispers crescendoed, voices overlapping in a haunting harmony that chilled him to the bone. "Why do you linger?" he whispered, voice cracking. A sudden rustle stirred the stalks, and for a moment the shape of a figure emerged tall, shadowed, shifting in the moonlight. Thomas's heart pounded fiercely, but he held his ground, meeting the unseen gaze with a defiant stare. The whispering faded into silence, leaving a heavy stillness that pressed against his chest. He knew then that the darkness was far from gone. It was waiting, patient and hungry. Returning to the village, Thomas met Maggie near the old well, her face pale but resolute. "We can't stop watching," she said quietly. "The shadows are growing, and with them, the fear. But we have to hold on. For the village, for those still here." He nodded, feeling the weight of their shared burden. "We'll find a way," he promised, though the words felt fragile in the night air. As the village slept uneasily, the cornfields whispered on, secrets weaving through the stalks like threads of shadow. The harvest spirit lingered, a dark reminder that some pacts, once made, are never truly broken. And in Harrow's End, the shadows waited patiently for their moment to return. The morning sun spilled over the horizon like molten gold, bathing Harrow's End in a warm, almost forgiving light. The cornfields that had once whispered ominously in the night now stood tall and vibrant, their stalks swaying gently in the soft breeze as if offering a silent benediction. For the first time since the devastating events of last harvest, the village breathed a tentative sigh of relief. The air buzzed with cautious optimism, yet beneath the surface, an unmistakable tension lingered, a shadow of uncertainty that no amount of sunlight could fully dispel. Thomas Grady stood at the edge of the fields, his sharp blue eyes scanning the horizon. The familiar rustling of the stalks was oddly comforting, but he could not shake the feeling that the silence between the rustles was just as significant, as though the fields were holding their breath. Beside him, Maggie Ellis adjusted the scarf around her neck, her auburn hair catching the light as she followed his gaze. "They look healthy," she said quietly, her voice barely above the whisper of the wind. "Too healthy, maybe." Thomas nodded slowly, his weathered face taut with the weight of unspoken fears. "It's like they're trying to tell us something, or waiting." Around them, the village was awakening from a long, dark nightmare. The once fractured community had begun to stitch itself back together, though the scars were still raw and visible. The festival grounds, though subdued, were being cleaned and prepared for the annual celebration, a tradition that now felt both sacred and fragile. As Thomas and Maggie walked, they passed groups of villagers, cautiously inspecting the crops, exchanging whispered conversations filled with a mix of relief and lingering dread. Sarah Pike, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion, approached them, clutching a small bundle of wildflowers picked from the edge of the woods. "It's good to see the fields like this again," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I can't stop thinking about what we lost." Maggie reached out, placing a comforting hand on Sarah's arm. "We all feel it, but maybe this is a chance, a new beginning." Meanwhile, Sheriff Daniel Crow patrolled the village square, his weather-beaten face set in a grim line. The lawman had been skeptical of the supernatural claims at first, but the events of the past months had eroded even his hardened pragmatism. He exchanged nods with Thomas as they crossed paths. "Still hearing anything unusual out there?" Crow asked, his voice low. "Nothing concrete," Thomas replied, "but that doesn't mean the danger's gone." That evening, as dusk bled into night, Thomas and Maggie returned to the fields. The golden hues of the day faded into deep indigos and purples, and the whispering wind returned softer, more elusive. Thomas's heart pounded as the faint murmurs teased the edges of his hearing, stirring old fears. "Do you hear that?" Maggie whispered, her eyes wide. Thomas nodded, swallowing his dread. "It's like they're waiting for something, or someone." Their unease was shared by others. Old Man Harrow, the village elder whose cryptic warnings had once been dismissed as ramblings, stood alone atop a hill overlooking the fields. His gaze was fixed beyond the stalks, searching the horizon for signs only he seemed to perceive. A sudden chill swept through the air, and a shadow flickered momentarily among the cornstalks behind him, a fleeting glimpse that sent a shudder through his ancient bones. Back in the village, the memorial for those lost to the curse had become a place of quiet gathering. Families lit candles and shared stories, their voices low but resolute. The harvest festival was being planned once more, this time with a somber reverence that acknowledged the cost of prosperity. Thomas found himself caught between hope and fear. The fields might appear blessed, but the dark covenant etched into the soil of Harrow's End was not so easily broken. He knew the cycle of sacrifice and shadow could begin again at any moment, and he vowed to remain vigilant. As the village settled beneath a sky dusted with stars, the whispers carried on the wind, faint yet unmistakable. They were a reminder that beneath the new dawn lay the ever-present harvest of shadows, waiting patiently for its moment to return. And Thomas Grady, once a skeptic, now the reluctant guardian of his people's fate, stood ready to face whatever darkness awaited. The night deepened, and the fields rustled softly, as if alive with secrets yet to be told. Somewhere deep within the stalks, the ancient spirit stirred, biding its time. The cycle was far from over. To be continued. The dawn crept slowly over Harrow's End, painting the horizon with pale strokes of gold and pink that barely softened the chill in the air. The cornfields, once again lush and swaying gently in the morning breeze, seemed to hold their breath, as if waiting alongside the village for what might come. Thomas Grady stood at the edge of the oldest field, his eyes scanning the undulating sea of stalks. Every rustle a potential message, every shadow a possible threat. Years of toil had weathered his frame, but the weight of the recent horrors pressed heavily upon his shoulders. His sharp blue eyes, tinged with the faintest hint of grey, reflected a resolve forged through fear and grief. Behind him, the village stirred cautiously. Survivors gathered in small clusters, their faces drawn and pale, the scars of loss etched deep. Maggie Ellis moved among them with steady purpose, her auburn hair catching the fragile light as she spoke softly, her voice a balm to their raw nerves. The old journal, now carefully guarded, lay open on the wooden table, its worn pages a reminder of the dark covenant that still bound them to the land. Though the fields had fallen silent for now, the knowledge of what might return settled like a shadow over every heart. Sheriff Daniel Crow paced near the doorway, his weather-beaten face set in grim lines. The lawman's pragmatism had been tested beyond its limits, yet he remained a steadfast pillar in a community teetering on the edge of despair. Eli Grady lingered close to Thomas, his younger brother's nervous energy a stark contrast to Thomas's steely calm. Their earlier tensions had softened, replaced by a mutual understanding born of shared trauma. As the sun climbed higher, Thomas led a small group to the site of the sacrificial altar deep within the cornfield. The ancient stones, entwined with creeping vines and faded symbols, held an eerie stillness that chilled the air. Thomas knelt, tracing the faint bloodstains that lingered, a cruel testament to the past and the grim choices made. The whispers that had haunted the village seemed to have retreated, but Thomas knew better than to trust the silence. The wind teased the leaves, carrying a faint murmur that brushed against his mind like a cold finger. "It's never truly gone," Maggie said quietly, joining him. "The spirit waits, watching, hungry." Thomas swallowed hard, the weight of the ancestral pact pressing down on him. "Then we keep watch. We protect what we can. This village, our home, is worth the fight." Night fell swiftly, wrapping Harrow's End in a blanket of quiet darkness, broken only by the soft rustling of corn. Thomas stood sentinel, the chill seeping into his bones as he listened for the faintest whisper and echo of the harvest spirit's lingering presence. The fields seemed to pulse with a life of their own, shadows shifting just beyond sight, hinting at the ancient hunger that might one day rise again. Behind him, the village held its breath, suspended between fragile hope and enduring dread. The harvest had ended, but the story was far from over. Thomas's gaze hardened, steeling himself for the uncertain dawn, ready to face whatever shadows the next season might bring. The legacy of Harrow's End was etched in blood and silence, a testament to the cost of survival and the price of forgotten pacts. As the wind whispered through the golden stalks, carrying voices both old and new, Thomas knew one truth above all: in this place, beneath these skies, the harvest of shadows would never truly end.